Let anyone who is thirsty come to me. If you've been following along this month, a couple of weeks ago, we saw Jesus sharing with the 5,000, breaking bread among them and continuing to tantalize them so much that they were stalking him everywhere he went. They were sick and in need, and they wanted his presence wherever they could find it. And so as those thousands had followed him, now he is going to seek the thousands. He leaves Galilee and the stretching sea therein. And I like to think that he took some time before he went on his journey to the temple in Jerusalem, time to pause and drink in the waters of life before making that trek. Now, as we see him at the festival, as it is outlined, we see him at Sukkot, the festival of booths. He stands in the heart of religious life in the temple at the height of a sacred festival, seeking these thousands. He chooses this moment intentionally to make a point. Now, this festival recalls the Israelites' Exodus journey with Moses through the wilderness. The refugees, as you'll remember, lived in tents, fleeing Pharaoh. Fragile, temporary shelters were set up as they traveled a nomadic life, seeking a promised land, and they were utterly dependent on God for safety, sustenance, and water. And it is this nomadic memory alongside Moses so powerful that it was ritualized, and through different iterations, it was observed in Jesus' day, and it's still observed among our Jewish siblings today. And it was that day when Jesus was in the temple, here in the Gospel of John, that priests would have drawn water from the pool of Siloam and carried it through the water gate to the altar. The harvest, the barley, wheat, and grapes had already been gathered, and it is a time of joy and remembrance, a celebration of God's provision and a prayer for its continuation into the rainy season that was to come. It is in this moment Jesus stands up. It's in the middle of the ritual on the final culmination. Now, in this moment, we have a lot of visions and understandings about who Jesus represents to whom. We see at the latter part of this passage that there wasn't agreement amongst everyone what to expect or believe of this man who dared to stand up, this rabbi who'd been teaching in the previous days, and who now in this place and in this time, some would see him as the disruptor of sacred tradition, and others of which we tend to descend, recognize him as amplifying the heart of the ritual itself. God provides in the wilderness, and Jesus seems to say, and here I am. He doesn't reject his faith, he embodies it. He speaks to the spiritually thirsty, the weary, the despairing. He's looked them in the face over across the hillsides in these days and weeks prior. And he brings the traditional ritual into the present, meeting people right in the middle of their need. What was the need? Well, we know they've been healing and teaching the sick, searching for ways that he could bring his abundance unto those who are desperate for it. So his presence in this moment, his protest, it's a proclamation. Let anyone who is thirsty come to me, and let the one who believes in me drink. Out of the believer's heart shall flow rivers of living water. It's a proclamation of solidarity and joy, an embodiment of this remembrance and this festival. Now this week, as our passage happens to correspond then with the observance of Sukkot as it has just taken place, perhaps you saw sukkahs, temporary booths, constructed in backyards or community lawns of Jewish neighbors to celebrate Sukkot. Jerry Brown, as we found out in Bible study, had ridden his bike with friends to visit the sukkahs of several Howard County's Jewish congregations. He went on that bike route and he showed it to us too, and I still am not sure how you got up that Harriet Tubman hill. He says he has an e-bike, which might explain things. Now, these booths are adorned with branches and elements of the harvest. They are meant to be exposed and impermanent, reminding us of our dependence on God. And there is a thatch of a roof that is made up of these branches to provide shade, but you still should be able to see through that sky. There are dwellings of joy. Yet they also leave room for lament, for hope in the midst of wilderness today. They are signs of resilience and reminders of divine provision. We remember the Israelites wandering. And as we look out and imagine looking up at the stars, we think of today's refugees and migrants, those displaced with a shortage of food and water and livelihood. And we remember the hostages who returned to Israel this week at the end of this festival as it corresponded, 2 years after October 7. What was it like around the sukkahs here in Howard County and around the world, and imagining the indwelling, the harvest of those who had returned. And we hold in prayer all who remain vulnerable in Israel and in Gaza. In Gaza, how might streams of living water flow? There's a bracing for what the next steps hold. We acknowledge that so many have perished, and over 70% of water and sanitation facilities have been destroyed. So friends, how do we do this? These vessels, these baskets of life, these bodies we hold the joy and the struggle that we feel like a wandering humanity, lost in the wilderness sometimes of our own making. Will God provide in this? During the Occupy Wall Street movement that was all the way back in 2011, can you believe it? Can you stretch your mind back until 2011? Rabbi Jill Jacobs taught among protesters living in tents during Sukkot. She wrote about the sense of vulnerability and protection in the public square, even there at the foot of giant financial institutions. She wrote, Sukkot doesn't try to resolve this paradox. Rather, the sukkah, forces us simultaneously to experience both fragility and divine protection. And through this experience, we learn that the seemingly strongest structures can sometimes fail to protect us, while the most fragile structures can help us feel protected. And we see this paradox today. Institutions we thought were permanent, healthcare, voting rights, judicial system, fraying. The vulnerable are detained, displaced, and disenfranchised. But we see in this fragility opportunity that there is strength in a crowd and strength among the voices that dare to rise within it. Jesus stood up in the middle of things then. And I believe that Jesus stands up in the middle of things now, even if we don't agree about who he is, where he came from, or everything about what his message means. He dares to claim a joy that cannot be stripped away, even when institutions fail. A presence and a provision of the Spirit that dwells with us. And he showed us that the more we embrace our invulnerability, the more we recognize God's protection. That's what I've heard about the people of Gaza. The more our hearts are open to the Spirit's flow, the more we are healed of hopelessness, the more we stand with others at the rivers of life. It is in this vulnerable space of which we stand today, friends, that we can both acknowledge pain and dare to joy. Humor even comes when we embody hope together. And I was reminded of this when I was talking to a blow-up shark yesterday. She had taken off her hood because it was hard to breathe inside that costume. I know she needed to catch her breath, but she was ready to put that hood back on up and swim through the waters that were necessary, raising a visible presence and sign and her voice into this moment. They are the living waters that insist on finding a way in our brokenness. This week, Sue Sinnott shared a picture of Niagara Falls after I asked her to. I'd been visiting Bev Roberts, and there's been pictures because Sue had actually gotten to be on a boat underneath the falls. Have you done this? And I want to hear more about her time there. But I invite you, as we think about these healing waters and where we stand in this vulnerable moment, to acknowledge how important it is to find ourselves along these bodies of water. Sometimes it is the churning of a Niagara as we can welcome that sense of pulse as it matches our own energy. But so oftentimes it's the lake nearby, the Kinamakundi Lake or Lake Centennial or Lake Elkhorn or Wild Lake. And they've shown that, the research bears this up, that blue spaces, as they're called, improve mental health, reduce stress, and restore our sense of peace. I think that's why I want to know that Jesus was there taking in those waters for the mission that he needed to accomplish. Beyond the science, the water holds deep spiritual symbolism as we see today. Water is life. As Sammy told us, it's 80% of our bodies. It nourishes, cleanses, and renews us. It is the medium of baptism and the sign of rebirth. It is the living water that Jesus offers to the thirsty. So I encourage you this week, and maybe it's just a postcard or something you see on TV, or maybe like Mary Jane, you were at the beach this morning. I encourage you this week to sit beside water and to be reminded of your own composition. Our body's made of it, and we are called unto it. We remember that water flows from our taps, the waters that sustain crops, the water that quenches thirst. And remember the living water that flows from the heart of faith. So blue spaces invite us to pause, to reflect, and to be still and know our God. They strengthen us to face hard things, and they remind us that even in chaos, there is a current of grace. Even in dryness, there is a promise of a flow.